Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Nurses Speak. This is Tonya with Nurses Speak, the channel for nurses, all nurses, and where no topic is off limits. So today, I'm so thrilled to have as my guest, Ophelia Byers, DNP, APRN, and the founder and principal of SitchRoom LLC. Ophelia is a leadership and self-leadership coach and will share with us why having an exit plan is particularly important for nurses in leadership roles.
Tonya, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So Ophelia, feel free to tell our community a little bit about the SitchRoom and why you started it before we talk about planning an exit strategy.
Yes, thank you so much. So hello to the listening community for Nurses Speak. Thank you so much for joining today. SitchRoom is, as Tonya said, a coaching and consulting practice that I developed in February of 2022. And my many years of nursing and nursing leadership have taught me a lot about the importance of leaders, the importance of effective, empathetic, authentic leadership, and how so many nurses who aspire to leadership or who are in leadership positions don't have all of the tools they need to really elevate their leadership practice, to elevate in their leadership practice, to advance in their careers. Often there are not enough mentors and sponsors, particularly, and my focus is for leaders of color and even more specifically, Black leaders. There is not enough mentorship and sponsorship for us, often because there's not enough of us in roles within our organizations that allow us to have that kind of access. So SitchRoom is my way of providing that access as an experienced leader, as a nurse executive who's worked in 2 C-suites to date, to be of support to leaders who aspire further.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And I'm so glad that you made that distinction that your focus is to really support, you know, our leadership who are nurses of color and specifically Black nurses, because you're absolutely right. There is an underrepresentation in the hierarchy in leadership in healthcare in particular. And, you know, a lot of that can also contribute to what we also know as a toxic work environment for many of our nurses at all levels. So definitely, this is why it's so vital to maintain this platform so that we can bring these things more out in the open and acknowledge the existence of these disparities. And so before we jump into this topic of planning an exit strategy, I know your focus is specifically speaking to leadership, but you know, when we spoke initially, I felt like this is such valuable information that for nurses on all levels, even if you're just beginning in a leadership role, or you're an experienced leader, right? Because we have those as well who want to make changes in their career trajectory. And so this would be really valuable information. So the questions really surround, and I'm going to allow you to walk us through the process. When should exit planning begin? Who should an exit plan be shared with, right? Who should we be talking to about our exit plan, if at all? What should be in place before making an exit plan? And lastly, when would you advise postponing exit plan and perhaps looking for golden opportunities within the organization where one might already be working and you know, have some seniority in. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you now, Ophelia.
Sure. Well, exit planning, really important for us to always start with kind of defining it, right? I always like to make sure that we're aligned on what that means. And exit strategy, when we hear it, we often think about, sometimes you hear exit and you think about something that's maybe negative or pejorative. I am leaving the organization. And I would challenge us to think about it as a positive and a positive step in our career design. And so exiting doesn't necessarily, to your last question being answered first, doesn't necessarily mean exiting the organization. It doesn't necessarily mean exiting your unit even. It is the idea of moving on from your current level or your current role. If you're going from staff nurse to senior staff nurse, if you're going from one unit to another, if you're going from one department to another, if you're going from one site in the same system to another, or yes, in fact, if you are leaving the organization. So thinking of exiting more so as leveling up, right? Or moving on from whatever your current role is. So that's one way to look at exit strategy, to give us some context for how we can go about it. Then I'd like to use a metaphor, if you will, that I think that nurses will identify with pretty readily, no matter what role they're in. And it's really around discharge planning. So we know that whenever patients are admitted, we say discharge begins on admission. And we begin, based on what that patient's status is, we began making a care plan, a treatment plan, if you will. We'll use care right now because it works very well with exit planning and career design. And so you begin very early in your role determining what that plan is going to be. And so there are 4 things that I like to use in this metaphor, if you will. And it's the discharge planning process. It's determining your designated caregiver, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's transitions of care, and then finally your mode of transport. So your discharge planning, it is trying to understand and assess, what do I need to move on when I'm ready? And an exit strategy does not need to be, I'm leaving in a year. It can be, in 5 years, here's where I want to be. So what do I need to do in the course of that time to be ready for that next position? So it is having some sense of where you want to go, just like we want our patients know they want to go home, right? And so you're thinking about what that ultimate goal is, and then what the process steps are to get to that goal. So starting with discharge planning, knowing where you want to go and thinking about how to get there. Then number 2, the idea of a designated caregiver. So New York State, you might recall several years ago, that legislation was put into place where patients were asked to identify a designated caregiver on admission. Who's that person who's going to be informed about their care, about their process, and be responsible for being a part of the care team. In the exit strategy for career design, those are your mentors. Those are your sponsors. It might be me as your coach in SitchRoom, but who are the people that you are entrusting the care of your journey to? Who are going to be your advisors? Who are going to be your support people? Who's going to be that person that you reach out to when you have an SOS moment? So making sure that you identify very early on your network of support. Then 3, transitions of care. This is an important one. It's thinking about the work that you're doing and who you're going to entrust it to. And that's not just one person, it could be a number of people. In leadership, we call it succession planning. In any role, you should be thinking about who can you share your wisdoms with, your knowledge with, who are you helping to develop in your, even as you are developing, who are you helping to develop? Staff nurses, and maybe preceptors, you may be a mentor yourself. But one of the things that's really important when we're talking about exit planning is that we're making sure that we're leaving whatever we're leaving better than we found it. And that we're leaving a legacy of sorts, that we are taking care of our professional reputations, that we are taking care of the organizational mission and vision, that we are living and breathing the core values, and that we are really doing the work that our patients, their families, and the communities need. And we're leaving behind something to some degree tangible, if you will, in terms of the work that we've done. So that is extremely important, because a lot of times we're so focused on moving forward that we're not thinking about what we're leaving behind. And that's incredibly important, that we protect the work that we've done by leaving it in good hands. And then finally, that mode of transport. Where do you want to go? You thought about that earlier on with discharge planning, right? How are you going to get there? So that's incredibly important for us to ensure that we understand how stuff works, right? You know, sometimes like, I want to be a CNO. Okay, how are you going to get there? Do you understand what that role is? Do you understand the competencies that are required in that role, the experiences that employers want to know that you've had to be qualified for that role? And so making sure that we understand how we're going to get to where we want to be, and that it's not just a dream. It can certainly start with a dream, but that we have a plan to get there. So I like to use those 4 nurse-centric approaches and ways of thinking when we're talking about exit strategies.
Right. Absolutely. And I think tying it in with things that, concepts that nurses are already familiar with is a very practical way to just identify how we need to align our goals with our strategic moves in
Mhm.
our career, for advancement, essentially. Because you're absolutely right. Even if it's a lateral move, let's say, it can still bring us into a new direction where our career can expand and open to new opportunities. Because I know a lot of nurses, they move from clinical roles into admin roles, operational roles, even informatics, and ultimately nursing research. So there can be so many opportunities, and every plan, just like a patient's plan, is individual,
That's
right?
correct.
So it's really important, I think, for nurses to just remember that, what Tonya does may not be what Ophelia does, may not be what your friend does. And so your plan is unique and specific to you. And, I'm pretty sure that when you're working one-on-one with your clients, that is something that is definitely impressed upon them. Because while we may have people that we admire and want to, follow a similar path, we're our own individuals. And so just because your journey isn't a straight line doesn't mean you're not going to get to where you want to be.
That's perfectly said. And it's so important, because I often hear people say, what's the playbook? What's the formula? They just tell me now, tell me how to do it. How do I get there? And it's not that simple. It's not that simple for anyone. And keeping the unique lived experiences of people of color, Black people in particular, Black women even more specifically, we definitely cannot apply someone else's formula to our own journeys. It is about knowing ourselves, and remembering, continuing with that metaphor of the patient. To your point, every patient is unique. So it's really delving in and understanding what our unique needs are, what are our strengths, what are things that we still need to work on. That's something that we have to be continually aware of. Why I love the authentic leadership style is because it always starts with the person in the mirror. It's, how am I doing? What's my mindset? What are my competencies? What do I still need to work on? What's my energetic presentation? How am I showing up today? It is that self-check and that self-assessment, which is why I refer to self-leadership as being something that's really, really important. We need to know where we stand to be able to even begin to plan. And if we try to apply someone else's plan to our own, we will often, it won't mean that we'll fail, but it can certainly delay our journey, because it's just not right for us. So I love that what you said, that it is a personalized plan. That's absolutely what I work on with my clients.
Okay. Now, one other important point you mentioned was starting with the person in the mirror and continually assessing oneself. And I totally agree with that, because sometimes we need that self-reflection, honest self-reflection, right? And to really take off the rose-colored glasses where we might be thinking, oh, things look so great, but essentially we have things to work on. So when would you say, or I should say, how would one go about if they're really looking for feedback, let's say, from others about how they're perceived? So aside from, let's just say, aside from one's typical, annual performance evaluation, what are some other ways that nurses can get feedback from others that's constructive when they're looking at how they come across in their relationship to others? Because obviously moving into leadership roles, one has to have some soft skills, right? And ability to relate to all different types of people in different circumstances. So one might find himself having some concerns around that, or maybe some rough edges that might need to be smoothed out. What would you recommend as a good way to identify those areas where we need to improve on?
Yeah, it's a simple approach, really. It's very simple. It's having, though, the mindset to be able to address where our areas of opportunity are, and to be ready to receive whatever we hear. That's the readiness that has to occur before we delve into getting feedback. And then the simple task is asking. The simple task is just asking. How often do we ask for feedback? In our one-to-ones with our leaders, perhaps, our peers, people from other departments and roles, people from roles lower than ours, so to speak. People, one really great way to know how you're doing is to ask people who you delegate to in some way, or who report to you. So if you're a leader, ask your direct reports, ask your indirect reports. Leaders can have skip level meetings where they ask the leaders who report to the leaders who report to them, if you will. If you're a staff nurse, ask the patient care techs. Ask people that you trust. Absolutely. People who you believe will give you constructive feedback, whose work you respect, because not everyone's feedback is constructive. Not everyone's opinion of you is meaningful. And that's something that's important for us to understand as well. But certainly there are people, a lot of great people that we can ask questions, these questions of very simple. I like to do regular check-ins to know how I'm resonating with the people around me that I care about, that I work so closely with. And this is for me the ultimate form of teamwork, not just telling me when I'm doing a great job, but also telling me where I can be better. And then I think being very specific in our questions, not just saying, is there anything you'd like to tell me? Right? Because
Right.
that's kind of difficult for people to gather. But how do you feel that I do with communication? How are my listening skills? When we're engaging, do you feel that I am hearing you, seeing you, following through? So it is being very specific in what we want to know. And then certainly we can say, is there anything else that you'd like to share with me? This is something that, again, we should do periodically. It's not something that you should do all the time necessarily, because you can open yourself up to people feeling like they can, randomly just give feedback, which is overwhelming. Can
Right.
be overwhelming for anyone to feel like you're being over tweaked,
Right.
if you will.
No one wants to get roasted every day, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you want to be very strategic and thoughtful about that. That might be something that you do, maybe just somewhere midway. So, we have mid-year reviews typically before our performance review. That should be done by your leader at your mid-year review, but that's something that you could also kind of conduct to yourself. So asking people from, again, different roles, different disciplines. You might talk to a physician or a nurse practitioner or a respiratory therapist if you want to. So it's asking people you trust, asking pointed questions. It's also remembering that self-assessment is not the same thing as constantly second guessing yourself. It's not the same. It's not the same of being hypercritical of yourself. This is something that, in my opinion, women of color, people of color, Black people do enough of anyway, because the world is quite critical, right? So it's not about constantly, second guessing yourself. It is checking in with yourself. It is a form of self-care. That's how I want us to think about it. It is, how am I doing? How am I feeling today? It's a self-awareness that's really, really important. You hear the term emotional intelligence. It is one that I respect in its earnest definition. I think that for us in certain environments, and for people of color, Black people in certain environments, sometimes the emotional intelligence can be wielded in a way that is not helpful for us, right? And so when we have concerns or when we speak up about something, sometimes emotional intelligence may be used, well, that's not emotionally intelligent to raise that issue. So I want us to also be discerning about how these types of approaches are used. Emotional intelligence has a lot of value, but it does not mean that you should not speak up. It does not mean that you should not be your authentic self. It does not mean that you should allow things to go on that do not sit well with you in the name of appearing amenable or amiable. And so there are these delicate balances that we have to be aware of that allow us to stay true to who we are, that allow us to promote and foster a culture and environment of psychological safety, not only for ourselves, but for our peers and for patients and family members. So feedback, again, is something that we should just simply ask for, but we also have to be ready to hear it and not defend, receive it, because if we're defensive, then people will not be inclined to share again. So be ready to receive it. And then I'll use another clinical term, metabolize.
Okay.
Right? when feedback is food, you take it in, and just like our bodies do, it extracts the nutrients, it excretes the waste. Not every element of feedback, even from people we admire, even what I'm saying today, right? There may be things that people take from it and go, that was good. There may be things people go, I don't agree with that. That wasn't so good. And you know what? That's metabolism, right? And take what you need. And so that's another important concept, but you have to be open to it. And when you are open to it and you're willing to ingest and are able to extract, then that feedback will be fuel for you.
Absolutely right. I never thought about it in terms of metabolism, but that's a great analogy as well. You know, sometimes you have to look at your decisions and how you look at your food, right? You don't want to eat something that you already know doesn't agree with you, no matter how tasty it might look. Oh, wow. And so, before we conclude this talk today, I just want to ask you, because I feel like somebody today might be watching or listening who may not necessarily be in their fully immersed in an exit plan. But as life habits, sometimes those really great one of a lifetime opportunities come along and they're stuck. They're like, should I go or should I stay and follow my original plan? What would you say to someone like that?
That's an excellent question. If it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, you have to explore it. I've often spoken with mentees, clients who go, my work is not done here though. The work's never done.
You can say that again.
The work's never done. And you are never going to be the person to get it all done, right? Our goal should be to leave things better than we found it. To leave the environment better, the climate better, the culture better, people whose lives we've touched in some way. Maybe we've put policies in place or programs in place. So the work continues, even without us. And if we're always working with that in mind, we can leave any role, unit, department, site, organization feeling confident, feeling accomplished, because we know that we left behind something that will go on without us. And we left behind people who know how to carry it on. We've given them that information. We didn't keep it all to ourselves. We didn't do the project and say mine, and now no one else knows what to do with it. When we've done those things that way, if we're constantly working with that mindset, we're ready to go at any time. Now, of course, there's the pieces around qualifications and credentials and all of that. And that's also something that we should be always working on, right? It is, again, having some idea of where you want to go, the credentials that you need to get there, and putting them into place, even if where you want to go is a longer term plan, because it is about being ever ready for opportunity. As they say, luck favors the prepared.
Yes.
And so if there's a once in a lifetime opportunity, you go for it. You don't self-reject. If it's not for you, you won't get it. And you have a job.
I love that. I love
right?
that. Don't self-reject.
Don't
Yeah.
self-reject. The worst thing that can happen is what? That you meet new people, that you improve your interview skills, that you learn new things about yourself in the process. There's nothing bad that can happen as long as you have the self-awareness that you are indeed ready. There is that pitfall where sometimes we want things, but we're not ready for them. So we have to do that self-assessment. I always like to go back to awareness. Why do I want it? Why? Is it the title? Is it the money? And that's okay if it is title and money. There's nothing wrong with that. But what else are you bringing to that work? How are you going to expand that work? How are you going to make that place better because of what you're bringing to the table? You have to know your why. Once you know your why, then you can start to say, all right, am I ready for this? Do I have what I need to be able to fulfill the requirements of the role? And then your how. How am I going to go about it? I'm going to apply. Who do I need to notify that I am interested in applying? What relationships do I need to be mindful of developing as I am going through this journey? There's a number of questions that we have to ask, but I do believe that we need to start with understanding our why and then going for it. It's just so important. There's someone else out there that's going for it and not hesitating and not wondering if they can check every single box. Rarely does anyone check every single box for a role.
True.
And if you do, you may be overripe for it. Right? So it's always good to go into a new role with some learning curve.
Yes.
Because that's what keeps us engaged and interested and energized. So sometimes we sit in our current roles almost too long. And then when you sit in them too long, when you have mastered that, you'll often start to get other work, right? Because you've exhibited mastery. You find yourself working sometimes at a level above where you currently are. And I've seen this happen in many roles. You're working a level above where you currently are. You're not getting the paid for it. You don't have the title for it, but you're doing the work. By the time you get into that role, it's not very exciting for you. Not that you've done it completely, but you've done so much of it that it doesn't keep you engaged. And you will find in some workplaces, especially in healthcare now, where there are a lot of financial strains, there will be people working above their role, if you will. And that's okay for experience and, as they say, exposure. But I would recommend you not tarry long there. If you are showing that you have the ability to work at a higher level, you've demonstrated that, it's time for you to seek that. Here's the other piece. It's also self-care, because you are a career person and you deserve to have a title and pay that's commensurate with your level of experience and the kind of work you do. But also when you stay in a role that you've mastered, if you will, you're blocking someone else's opportunity for advancement to that role.
Wow.
So community care is, it's time for me to move on so someone else gets this experience as well, right?
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I often see in nursing leadership in particular is there isn't, in my opinion, enough movement. People are in roles for a very long time. And so there's only a limit to the number of roles that are going to be created by the organization. It doesn't make business sense to create unlimited opportunities, right? And so if people don't move, then the only way for another to advance, people behind them to advance, is to leave the organization.
Absolutely. Yes.
So it's something for us to think about. It's moving on is also healthy for our team.
Yes. That growth and expansion really is vital to a successful career. overall, because as to your point, you're blocking someone else from advancing by you not advancing. And it's almost like a plant that has grown too big for the pot that it's in, right? Eventually the roots begin to die, right? And the whole plant suffers. So it's not about just, and that's the thing I think many of us need to think about. Nothing in life is just about us. There's always so many other people impacted by what we do and where we are, and we owe it not only to ourselves, but to those watching us, those supporting us, those that we work with, to move and to grow and to develop and become a better version of ourselves. And I'm so glad that, you are here to highlight so many of those important points, because those are things that are not often said. These are not everyday conversations. These are things where people may limit themselves because they just don't know what to do or how to do it, right? And so I just want you, before we close, to just let our audience know, let the community know how to get in touch with you. I am going to put your contact information in the description of this video, so it will be posted. But just from, your mouth to everyone's ears, how do we get in touch with you? And, any final words that you would like to share?
Sure. So I am at Ophelia, Ophelia, at SitchRoom, SITCH you can go to my website, www.sitchroom.com. Sitch is short for situation. So that's where you can reach out to me. My email is there. My phone number is there. And I am available to anyone. You can start out with a discovery session if you are interested in coaching, also leadership consultation. I also offer workshops around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and anti-racism. So if there's a need that you have as an individual, that your team has, or that your organization has, I am available to be of support to you. My final words are just simply take care of yourself. That's really what this discussion is about. We are often caring for others, our patients, their family members, the community, our teammates, our own families. But we also have to take care of ourselves. And taking care of ourselves includes taking care of our careers. When we do our careers well, as you mentioned, Tonya, it's not just about advancing ourselves, it's also others advancing, but it's also advancing the profession of nursing. And for people of color, Black people in particular, the more of us that are in roles of influence, in roles of decision-making power, we know there are studies, there is evidence. Healthcare will be better. Health equity will be advanced and furthered. And when we think more expansively, when we think community-minded and community care, we recognize that us optimizing our talents and broadening our influence is contributing to the work that is needed to alleviate disparities in workplaces and in healthcare.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, family, that concludes our talk for today on Nurses Speak. Again, this is Tonya with Nurses Speak. I want to thank Ophelia Byers for joining us today. And remember, this is the channel where no topic is off limits, because your voice deserves to be heard. Bye now.